This is Edith Mary with Fine Art and Foolery, one of the teachers at Oasis here in San Antonio. We are going to be doing a series of 4 watercolor classes designed to help you improve your watercolor skills and to gain confidence in your watercolor painting. And so that's what this particular tutorial is going to be about, improving your skills so you can paint this. You don't have to be a student at Oasis to follow along with this tutorial, because I'm also putting it up on my YouTube page and on my Facebook Fine Art and Foolery page. Like, subscribe, and share if you find this video to be of value to you, and hit the bell icon so that you can always get notified when I post new videos, which happens a couple times a month. So thanks so much, and I'll see you later.
Welcome back to the flower pot tutorial. All you're seeing me do here is use my spray bottle to clean off my palette and to wet my paints to get them ready to use. Notice that we're starting with the flowers. The leaf tutorial portion completely disappeared out into some video wasteland. I have no idea what happened to it, so we're just going to start with the flowers. The leaves were done exactly the same way as the flowers are going to be done. They were just done in different colors, that's all. I will list all of the materials I used, including the colors of the pigments, in the description below. For the flowers, I'm using Ultramarine blue, Cerurelian blue, Cobalt blue, Magenta, and Mauve. Like I said, they'll be listed below. All I'm doing is some petals I am putting the water in first, and others, and then charging the paint in, and others I am putting the pigment straight into the petal itself, and then highlighting by removing paint or making shadows by adding in a stronger wash, meaning more pigment, less water. You can see a lot of that happening, like right here. I'm working directly, putting the color directly into the petal. Now you might be wondering where the outline is. I did not bother doing any portion of the video on tracing because we all pretty much know how to trace. I took the pattern from an old coloring book that I had and modified it to fit the size of paper that I had. So I took an 8x10 and modified it out to a 9x14 piece of watercolor paper. And I traced it using graphite paper. That was it. You can different ways of tracing. Whichever way works for you, get the pattern on the paper. That's the portion. I think my lighting is slightly off because the yellows don't show up real well, but the tracing is hard to see. It should be hard to see on camera. Although I did try and make it a little darker, because once the pigment is over top of it, it's difficult to remove something underneath the paint. So that's why you want to make your lines, your tracing lines, as light as you possibly can get away with, so that they're not becoming part of the painting. Unless that is a style you like. No two petals or leaves were exactly alike. Each has a different strength of color. Each has a somewhat distinctly different color, because sometimes I put the magenta in as a shadow. Sometimes I put the mauve in as a shadow. Sometimes I just put in the straight ultramarine blue and then took a clean dry brush and wiped out some of the paint as a highlight. They can be any color you want. They don't have to be these colors. To me, they looked like hydrangeas, and I love blue hydrangeas for some reason or another, and so that's what I was attempting to go for. If you want them to be red begonias, by all means, make them red. It's your painting. It's up to you what you do with it. So I'm just continuing to fill in almost like color book or color blocking, but I'm adding, as you can see that I did right there, I just added in a deeper shade. I probably put in some of the magenta to make a deeper shadow. And notice that I'm skipping around a lot because you don't want to paint next to an area that you just painted. Otherwise you'll get burst outs and too much one petal blending into the next when you do that. So you want to make sure that if you're painting like right there, the petal you're painting next to is dry before you start the next one, or before you start the next layers, because sometimes it isn't, you don't just paint the petal or paint the leaf or whatever object you're painting. You have to layer the colors on to get the color that you want or the saturation of color that you want. And off to the side, I actually have my pattern that I originally had picked out for the class that I'm referring to. So you can't see it because there's no room for it. But it's there for me to refer back to make sure I'm putting the petals in the right place. Especially if some of my tracing is very faint. Whoa, what happened to my camera was having a hard time. See what I did there is I had too much paint in. And I just came in with a clean brush and took off some of the paint, and then came back in and put the center shadow in. And make sure you move your work around to make it more comfortable to work with, rather than having to stretch your hand or take the risk of putting your hand in wet paint, because then your painting is pretty much ruined when you do that. And I do speak from experience on that one. So just make sure you're painting in a comfortable position for yourself. And I'm also painting around the main butterfly. The butterfly will be the last thing I do. So I'm painting the petals and the leaves around the butterfly, which could be considered negative painting. And I'm dropping in the shadows as I go along, the magenta and the mauve as I go along, so that they have a chance to blend wet and wet. And once an area is dry, you can always come back in and add another layer of shadow. It's a little harder to remove paint once it's dry, but it is possible. In the original video, I was actually pointing some things out, but I can't work and talk at the same time, so I have to go back and dub over the narration, and hopefully I've remembered what it was I wanted to point out, and I don't know what I was pointing out there. Maybe you can figure it out and clue me in. But you can take any coloring book page, greeting cards. You can adapt them to work in any size that you want through tracing and enlarging, and there's different ways that you can do that. And if you want a video on that, a tutorial on how to enlarge or reduce, let me know and I will certainly do that. Notice that what appears to be a really nice rich cup of coffee up the top of the screen, it's not. It is my paint water. Make sure that you keep your paint water and your drinking water or soda or coffee or whatever separate, on separate sides of the table, because some of these paints contain toxic elements like the cadmiums and stuff like that. They're safer than they used to be, but you don't want to drink them. And I've occasionally rinsed a brush in my iced tea and was very disappointed when I went to drink it. So don't do that. Might be a good idea to use a container with a lid or something along those lines if you have something to drink near you. And there it was. I just simply removed the cup and changed the water because the water was getting dirty. And now we're going to come back in. I'm double checking my work to make sure I got all the flowers petals done. And now I'm going to be working on the railing that the flower pots are sitting on, and I've got some Van Dyke Brown, and I'm just taking the pots out of the palette. Why all of a sudden I decided to do that, I have zero idea, but I did. So I have Van Dyke Brown, and there is it looks like raw sienna. For the table, I actually use Van Dyke Brown, red ochre, and ultramarine blue. And I'm just filling in around where the pots sit. That becomes the wooden piece of the railing. And so I started out with the red ochre, and I'm adding in the Van Dyke Brown to create the shadows. In general, and I'm also working around the flowers that I put at the bottom. In general, you want your shadows and your darks to be really dark and your lights to be really light, because contrast matters. And that goes with any type of painting, whether it's watercolor or acrylic or oils or chalk. There'll be some pastel videos coming shortly because I'm studying that now. And I'm just adding the ultramarine blue in as to deepen those shadows even more. Now remember, your paints are going to dry lighter than what you're seeing them wet on the paper. So if you think it looks too dark, it's probably not. If you think you're overworking it, wait till it dries so you can see what it really looks like. And that is Van Dyke Brown straight out of the pan. These half pans came from Hobby Lobby. They're the Master's Touch brand. That's the Hobby Lobby's own brand. They are not sponsoring me or paying for this video. I happen to actually just like the product, and so I use it frequently. But you don't have to use any particular brand. Any brand you like will do. You don't even have to use Van Dyke Brown. You can use burnt umber. There is almost always an acceptable substitute. I'm just continuing to fill in the darks, the shadows, and pushing paint around. It's a lot of what watercolor is. It's just pushing paint around. And I'm saving the flowers for after I get the darks in, because the flowers are on top. In the painting, the plane of the painting, the flowers are on top. And so it's easier to correct them when something goes wrong than if you wound up painting the entire painting with messed up lines, and now the edges of your flowers are messed up too. So I hope that just made sense what I said. Notice I had too much dark in there, and I just wanted to take some of that out. So I just went in with a clean brush. And I almost always have a wet paper towel in my hand. Looks a little weird and a little wonky. It's still in its ugly stage right now. So this brush that I'm using here is a Royal Langnickel Zen series. It is specifically made for, that's a number 10 millimeter. It is specifically made for watercolor because it doesn't really have a lot of bounce in it, but it does come to a super fine point. And here in this video, all I am doing is spreading water onto the pots. I'm going to be working wet and wet. For the leaves and the flowers, for the most part, I worked wet on dry. But for the pots, I'll be working wet on wet, and I wet the area that I'm going to paint, and then I put in color. And for the pots, I used carmine, red ochre, and burnt sienna. And to deepen those, the shadows, I just went in with a little bit more burnt sienna, which is the darkest of the colors that I'm using for the pots. And later on, you can see where I go in to make the shadows even deeper with a Pigment Micron pen and some Crayola markers, watercolor markers. But you could even go back in with some Van Dyke Brown, just putting in some dots and spots because it's old. They're old pots, and you want to make them look like they might be on the verge of falling apart. And it's just putting the deepest of the shadows under one of the leaves and the edge of the pot there. Notice I haven't done the rim of the pot yet. I started with those. And a lot of shadows, when you're putting in your low lights, it's a lot of layering. So you have to wait till it dries, put in another layer. Wait till that dries, put in another layer. But that's how you get really, really, really good deep shadows. I absolutely love this brush. It is one of my favorite. I love the whole Zen series from Royal Langnickel. So I'm just continuing to put in texture, age spots, so to speak, picking up directly from the pans and putting in. And I think that one spot that seems to be a white streak across is actually a scratch in my paper. I'm just coming in with more lowlights, putting the lowlights in, while the pot, that area is still wet enough to be able to spread out to look halfway decent. And like I said, don't be afraid to turn your work to face you or to face away from you, whatever's going to work best for you. And only you can determine that. I'm just getting out a lot of that red ochre at the moment. Making a, or was that carmine? Take your pick. I'm trying to make a nice rust color, or terracotta color. And those are the 4. So it looks like I got some yellow ochre in there as well. Just putting in shadows. Where the pot and the leaves overlap, there is going to be a deeper shadow area. And I'm still working around the butterfly, because like I said, I'm saving that one for last. And I know this video, I sped it up quite a bit because in total painting time was about 2 hours. That does not include the drying time. Drying time, you might as well say this was a 4 or 5 hour painting if you're going to include drying time. So that's why it's sped up. If you want to slow down any section of it, feel free. My voice will sound a little strange, but go for it. Especially if you need to see an area in more detail. And if you have any suggestions as to things you want to learn or paintings you'd like to give a try and you want me to do a tutorial for, all you have to do is put it in the comments section below, and I will see what I can do. Because if you want to learn it, I probably need to teach it, because that's the best way to learn for yourself anyway. And here I'm just using straight Van Dyke Brown to put in the dirt in the pot. And a few bit more shadows, but basically not every area around the flowers and the leaves is a background. Some of it's dirt in the pot and some of it's actual sky or ground. Okay, so now I'm getting ready to do the background. So all I'm doing is I mixed up some green, some blues and some greens, and putting in a very abstract background. Something that's going to recede backwards, but yet isn't going to be plain white paper. So there's yellows and blues, because yellow and blue make green. So there's yellows, there's blues, there's green, but they're very pale. They're there to just simply fill the white space so that the white space doesn't become noticeable. And this is where you're going to have to refer to your original drawing or pattern to figure out. Sometimes it's hard especially when you have a lot of flowers and leaves like this, it's hard to figure out what's background sometimes. That's why it's necessary to refer to the pattern an awful lot. But that's all I'm doing, is filling in white space so that it becomes background rather than right there and noticeable. I want it to be more pastel. I don't want it to stand out at all. And so I was just using the blues from the flowers to tie the whole thing together. Because if you use one color in one area, you should use it in other areas as well. So that at least ties the background to the foreground. Now here I'm just doing straight vermilion and crimson right out of the pans without mixing for the flowers at the bottom. I used a little bit of ultramarine blue for the shadows, the dark areas in the centers. And I got a different glass this time for the leaves. The leaves I just use straight phthalo green. I got them slightly out of order, but that's all right. It works. Here you can see me applying the crimson and the vermilion, but there needs to be like a darker center, and that's where the ultramarine blue comes in. And we're back to the leaves. And it's just a matter, those leaves were nothing other than filler. I don't think they added anything other than visual interest, so I did not do anything special with them. They are literally just straight phthalo green. And I apologize, my furnace just kicked on. So I'm just trying to create some highlights and shadows on those flowers. And I thought I would use this brush for the butterfly, but changed my mind and went back to my Royal & Langnickel angle shader, which, like I said, comes to a really fine point when it's wet. And for the butterfly, I'm using gamboge, vermilion, orange, and carmine to create a lot of depth of color. So all I'm doing is flooding the wells on my palette, and I'm wetting my butterfly, working wet and wet with the butterfly. Because I don't want to have to do it little bits at a time, I decided, since it was such a big area, I would do it all at once. And you'll see why a little bit later on. And I'm just adding that gamboge and the orange. And it's a little too wet. So I'm just trying to fill in the areas right now. I tend to get overly generous with water. So I'm having to suck some back up and put in a stronger pigment straight from the pan rather than the pigment diluted with water, because I want the butterfly to really be the focal point, so it has to stand out over everything. I am not sure what happened with my lighting, but the butterfly, in this particular case, the lighting did not pick up the yellows and the oranges too well, and the butterfly seems kind of, in the video, seems kind of bland, to where in real life, when you see the actual painting, it's not bland at all. That butterfly just sort of pops. Again, you don't have to do any particular colors. You can do any colors you wanted with a butterfly. This, for me, was the easiest to do. Considering the time constraints of the class that this tutorial is being done for. And frankly, even if I was doing it otherwise, for just myself or a commission, I'd still probably be doing it the same way. And I was experimenting with the lighting to see if I could get it to look any better, and I couldn't. And now we've reached the stage where we're putting on some final touches to the flowers, and that's just white acrylic paint. I didn't even bother to use gouache. I just used white acrylic paint and my detail brush. It's the Royal on Langnickel number 20. And I'm just using that white paint to put the dots in the center for the stamens and the flowers. It makes a huge difference in the flowers. Now they're actually starting to look like flowers. Now that everything is dry, I got out an entire selection of gel pens, and there's a chalk marker, a jelly roll pen. I decided in this particular case to use my fine point Faber Castell Pip Pen to add some detail and some aging onto the pot. This particular set of Faber Castell pens are dark brown, and they lend themselves well to the coloration of the pots. I was at one point going to go ahead and put in a little spider and a spider web between the two pots, but I changed mine. And I'm just using the pen to add a little bit more depth, add some wood grain to the railing that the pots are sitting on. There's my Pigma Micron number. I went with the number 8 because it's a bolder nib, and it's not as fine point, and it's easier to fill in stuff. Like here where I'm filling in the edge of the wing is black. It's just easier to fill in with a larger nib. So at this point, we're just putting in the lines in the butterfly wings, nothing special. Just try and be symmetrical about it. And I'm outlining the wings against the flowers to make it pop a bit more. So this becomes the finishing up stage. So we're no longer quite in the ugly stage of the painting. We're now kind of in the, it might turn out all right kind of stage. This is where having your pattern next to your work comes in really handy. I use all kinds of materials. Later on you'll see I get out the Crayola watercolor markers to add some shadows, extra depth to the shadows. Gel pens, because it's just, or glitter pens, because no painting is complete unless it's got a little touch of glitter somewhere. And actually, I don't think this painting has glitter in it because it wouldn't show up against the colors. Although some iridescent paint on that butterfly would have made it pop too. But it's too late now because I'm all done. It's signed and everything. Wow, watching me do a tutorial is kind of like watching paint dry. And we're back with the white paint again because the yellow dots on the wing just did not pop the way I thought the white might. So I came back in with the white paint to make white circles or dots on the butterfly wing. And so while you couldn't necessarily show this in a juried competition because you've included white paint, acrylic paint, you certainly could hang it on your wall or give it as a gift. And now I'm back to using the Faber Castell Pip Pen. This is the brush marker, which is not quite the same thing as a nibbed pen or like the Pigma Micron pens. This is an actual brush marker. It makes it easier to fill in large areas. Makes it easier to outline too. I'm coming back in with a little bit of white paint again on those butterfly wings because it just won't pop any other way unless we're using the acrylic paint. Not sure if the butterfly is anatomically correct or not, or even if that's the right word. But it doesn't have to be because it's my butterfly. I can make it anything I want. I really wish that yellow orange of the butterfly would show up a little better because it is just magnificent. It really pops on top of that blue. Okay, here's where I get creative with markers. Oh, okay, I was putting some more wood grain in with the Pigment Micron pen. Jelly roll, I was trying to use a jelly roll and it just wouldn't show up. Now that's the Crayola watercolor markers I'm using to add some more depth and more texture to the pots and to the shadows under the railing. And here I go, experimenting with the colors for the butterflies. I do not even know what colors they are. They don't have names. It's the color on the caps. But I was just adding in depth and interest by adding in another color. Along the bottom, the orangey color. And always test your colors on the back, whether it's the markers, because that's a yellow that I'm putting on top of yellow, but it's increasing the saturation and the depth of color. Always test your colors on the back of your painting to make sure you're going to like them, to make sure you know what they're going to be like when they're laid down. And I'm just adding more yellow highlights to those leaves. And there you go, from traced pattern to finished product. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and share. And hit the bell icon so you can get more videos as I go along, about a couple of times a month. Enjoy this painting and your work. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Thanks so much.